A new poll from Gallup shows that Trump's immigration approval rating has dropped to just 35%. That number is only likely to get lower as Americans learn more about what Trump is doing to immigrants and immigrant communities. New reporting by the Washington Post finds that it is now nearly impossible for millions of immigrants to leave facilities like the Florida Everglades Detention Center, forcing them to stay in conditions like those described by the congressman, potentially for years. Washington Post with this stunning piece of reporting, quote, the Trump administration has declared that immigrants who arrived in the U.S. illegally are no longer eligible for a bond hearing as they fight deportation proceedings in court. In a July 8th memo, Todd Lyons, acting director of Immigration and Customs Enforcement, told officers that such immigrants should be detained, quote, for the duration of their overall removal proceedings, which can take months or years. Immigration lawyers say the Trump administration is expanding a legal standard typically used to hold recent arrivals at the U.S.-Mexico border to a much broader group, including immigrants who have lived in the United States for decades. Many of them have U.S. citizen children, lawyers say, and probably have the legal grounds to defend themselves against deportation. This policy appears to be just the latest step by the Trump administration to consolidate power in the hands of ICE outside of the American court system. Washington Post adds this reporting, quote, in the past, immigrants residing in the U.S. interior generally have been allowed to request a bond hearing before an immigration judge. But Lyons wrote that the Trump administration determined that such immigrants, quote, may not be released from ICE custody. In rare exceptions, immigrants may be released on parole, but that decision will be up to an immigration officer, not a judge, he wrote. And this policy has already taken effect, with immigration lawyers reporting that their clients have been denied bond hearings in immigration courts across more than a dozen states since the memo was issued last week. That is where we start the hour. Some of our favorite reporters and friends. Washington Post national investigative reporter, MSNBC contributor Carol Leonnig is here. She is bylined on all that great Washington Post reporting we read from. Also joining us, senior opinion writer and columnist for the Boston Globe, MSNBC political analyst Kim Eckenstor is here, and Princeton University professor, MSNBC political analyst Eddie Glaude is here. Carol Leonnig, do me this favor and just take me through not just your reporting, but what it changes, because it feels like it changes something that has been standard practice, that has been, I hate to use the word norm because Trump made such a mockery of norms, but just talk about how this changes the lived reality for so many immigrant families and immigrant communities.
Nicole, you summed it up already pretty well, but I'll tell you without wanting to be breathless about it, this is a drastic overhaul of the way the U.S. government has handled immigrants coming into our country who might claim asylum, who might claim a reason why they're able to come into our country and live here. Now they're going to be detained indefinitely at taxpayer expense. And for most of the legal experts we spoke to, they're also going to be denied their due process rights to make their claim about why they should be allowed to stay here. You know, the Trump administration has, and Trump's allies have dismissed previous decades of policy as catch and release, you know, detain and release. And now they're just going to detain and detain. That's going to cost U.S. taxpayers hundreds of millions of dollars, and it appears that this policy change comes right in the wake of the big, beautiful bill that provides billions of dollars for exactly this, the profit of private correction facility owners and operators to detain people. Secondly, you have all sorts of folks who are no longer going to be able to get out on a bond hearing, live in America until their real adjudication of their immigration status. It will make it, as far as I can see, much easier for the Trump administration to deport people without any stops from A to Z. It'll be, we detained them, we kept detaining them, and if we want to deport them, we may do that without any warning to anyone.
Carol, let me read from the report. Forcing them to remain in detention facilities, often in far-flung areas, such as an alligator-infested swamp in Florida, or the Arizona desert would make it more difficult to fight their cases because they'll be unable to work or easily communicate with family members and lawyers to prepare their cases. Quote, I think some courts are going to find that this doesn't give non-citizens sufficient due process. That's Paul Hunker, an immigration lawyer and former ICE chief counsel in the Dallas area. They could be held indefinitely until they're deported. How do you legally create a structure where people who've committed no crimes, it sounds like they're making space for anyone just in the immigration or asylum seeking process? How do you create a legal structure where you keep those people forever and then send them to a third country? How do you avoid judicial review?
It's the $64,000 or now $64 million question, Nicole. A lot of the way in which the Trump administration has proceeded as it seeks rather desperately to meet this 3,000 a day arrest and deportation goal of Stephen Miller's and Donald Trump's. A lot of the way that it's done that is sort of create a supra law. There is not any rooting in the current legal system for doing this. Remember, last year there was a report by the federal government and by the Department of Homeland Security, responsible for all of this, saying that they didn't want to detain these individuals indefinitely. And there were 7.6 million people then on the docket seeking asylum or challenging their deportation or alleging that they should be allowed to stay in the country. Think about how large a group of people that is and how each of them have very different, different buckets of legal claims. It seems to strain credulity that we're going to have a consistent legal strategy. And if it mirrors what the Trump administration has done in its deportation of individuals that they said were the, quote, worst of the worst to an El Salvadoran prison, while a federal judge was ordering that their plane be returned and circle back to the United States. If it mirrors that, then this will be very much extrajudicial.
Kim, let me. There's a lot of new reporting. Let me get through the reporting. There's so much to say about this, Carol Leonnig. It's whenever you think they've done the most audacious and inhumane thing, they do the next most audacious and inhumane thing. And maybe we should just stop there on that point. Kim, your thoughts?
Yeah. So what we're talking about the judiciary and what backstops there are to this kind of not only cruel and unusually cruel treatment, but also unlawful. I mean, the law provides, and the Supreme Court has even said, that people facing deportation must be given adequate notice and must have due process, the right, the opportunity to make their case as to why they shouldn't be deported or detained. And that clearly is not happening, in part because the same Supreme Court has consistently, right up through this week, when there is a challenge Trump policy and a lower court blocks it temporarily while the people who are challenging it can make their case, the Supreme Court swoops in and lifts that block and lifts that injunction. The Supreme Court made it more difficult, writ large, for lower court judges to even issue injunctions of broad applicability. So what the Supreme Court has been doing, telling the Trump administration and telling lower court judges, yeah, let him do what he wants, and then we'll figure out the legalities later. Problem is, the people who are in these awful detainment facilities that are being put up under short notices and, as it's described, looks more like a concentration camp or a gulag inside rather than an ICE detention facility where people should get their basic needs met. It's allowing that to happen, and the harm caused to these people, their families, their communities, the places where they work, will be irreparable by the time the courts, really only the Supreme Court, because they're really the only people left empowered to review this. That's how they made it themselves, gets involved. So this is basically, there is no legal backstop at this moment, not the way that it's been created. The Trump administration has been successful in amplifying its own and spreading its own power in the executive, while the judiciary and Congress has basically whittled away.
Eddie Glaude, Stephanie Cutter said this to me after the election. She was the senior advisor to Vice President Kamala Harris. And she said, you know, at his rallies, he played videos and the press never really covered the videos. And that's fair. I never covered the videos, but they were videos of crimes committed by people in this country illegally. And they were, you know, this macabre warm-up show. I don't even know how to describe it in the context of a Trump rally. But what Trump ran on was finding the people that carried out heinous crimes in this country who were also people in this country illegally. That is not what the Trump administration's mass deportation program is accomplishing. That's what Obama accomplished, to be fair and accurate, and that was controversial in its own right, in its own time. What Donald Trump is doing is ripping people out of communities, ripping people out of high schools, hunting people at baseball practice, ripping out people who have been here for decades, ripping people out of this country whose children are home alone, scared that their parents won't come home, and alienating the likes of Joe frickin' Rogan.